My father Samuel didn't leave behind stocks or real estate. He left behind maps, hundreds of them. They filled the attic of our old coastal home, smelling of aged parchment, sea salt, and ink. He wasn't just a cartographer, he was a poet of coastlines, a historian of forgotten shipping lanes. He could look at a faded nautical chart and tell you the story of every shipwreck, every ghost current that haunted its waters. To me, he was a hero. To my mother Isabel, he was a failure. A dreamer who charted imaginary worlds while she craved a real one, built on the solid foundation of wealth and status. After my father passed away from a sudden illness, she remarried within a year. Her new husband was Marcus Thorne, a shipping magnate with a portfolio as vast as the oceans and a smile as cold and sharp as an iceberg. I became the ghost of my father's attic, the keeper of his paper and ink legacy. While they lived a life of glittering galas and corporate takeovers, they saw my work, preserving and studying my father's charts, as a childish obsession, a refusal to move on. The end of my world began with a simple announcement at a sterile family dinner in their steel and glass penthouse. "We're selling the coastal property," Isabel said, not even looking at me. "The land is too valuable to let that old shack just sit there. Marcus has a buyer. They're planning a luxury resort." The words hit me like a rogue wave. That old shack was my home. That attic was my father's sanctuary. "You can't," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "His work, it's all there." Marcus Thorne finally turned his attention to me, his eyes holding a mixture of amusement and irritation. "Finn," he said, using my name like it was a piece of lint he was brushing off his cashmere sweater, "your father's work consists of dusty old drawings. We'll have them put in storage. Consider it a favor." The finality in his voice was absolute, but it was my mother's silence that broke my heart. She wouldn't even meet my gaze. That night I drove to the old house, the sound of the ocean a mournful roar outside. I sat in the attic, surrounded by the ghosts of my father's journeys. He had left me one thing besides the maps, a heavy, salt-stained sea chest, locked with a complex brass lock. His last words to me, spoken in a voice weakened by illness, had been a riddle. "The stars can't always guide you, Finn. Sometimes you have to look for the ghosts in the water." I'd never been able to open the chest, but that night, fueled by a desperate sense of finality, I looked at it differently. It wasn't just a chest, it was a map in itself. I traced the intricate carvings on the lid, constellations, but they were reversed, as if reflected in water. Ghosts in the water. My heart pounded. I rushed to one of my father's old chart tables, where a large mirror was mounted for reversing and comparing charts. I positioned the chest in front of it. In the reflection, the jumbled carvings aligned to form a set of numbers. A combination. With trembling hands, I turned the dials on the lock. Click, click, click. The lock sprang open. The chest didn't contain gold or jewels. It contained a single, rolled-up nautical chart, unlike any I had ever seen. It depicted a remote, treacherous stretch of coastline known to sailors as the Reaper's Teeth. The chart was covered in my father's familiar, precise notes. But as I held it under the dim attic light, I noticed something else. Faint, almost invisible lines drawn in a type of ink that only appeared under ultraviolet light, a trick he had taught me as a child. I switched on the UV lamp. The chart blazed to life. The faint lines formed a complex grid over the Reaper's Teeth. They weren't currents or depths, they were sonar signatures, wreckage sites, dozens of them. But these weren't old galleons. The shapes were modern, streamlined, submarines, a hidden graveyard of them. At the bottom of the chart was a single cryptic notation in my father's hand. They sank the truth, but they couldn't sink the echoes. Project Maelstrom. The next day, Marcus showed up at the house. He was all false smiles and forced empathy. "Finn, I know this is hard for you," he said, gesturing around the attic. "Your mother and I, we want to make this right. I'll buy all of this from you. The maps, the chest, everything. Let's say $100,000 for the memories." The offer was ludicrously high. $100,000 for old paper? It was a test. He wasn't buying memories. He was buying a secret. He knew something was here. He just didn't know what. I looked him straight in the eye. "My father's legacy isn't for sale, Marcus." His smile vanished. "Don't be a fool, boy. That's a generous offer. It expires in 24 hours. After that, the bulldozers arrive." He turned and left. I stood there, the hidden map clutched in my hand. He didn't want the maps. He wanted this map, the one that showed the ghosts in the water. My father hadn't just been charting coastlines. He had been charting a cover-up. And he had left me, his forgotten son, as the sole keeper of the map that led to the truth. Marcus Thorne's ultimatum echoed in the silent attic, a countdown timer on my father's legacy. 24 hours. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a threat. He knew, or at least suspected, that one of these dusty old drawings was more than just paper and ink. I spent the next few hours frantically scanning the hidden sonar map, my mind racing. Project Maelstrom. The name sounded ominous, military. I cross-referenced the coordinates on the chart with modern satellite imagery. The area known as the Reaper's Teeth was now a restricted maritime zone, officially designated as a naval weapons testing range. No civilian ships were allowed within 50 nautical miles. It was a perfect place to hide a graveyard. But why? What were these submarines? And what did they have to do with my father's death? His illness had been so sudden, so inexplicable. The doctors had called it a rare, aggressive form of neurological decay, but they never identified a cause. My search for Project Maelstrom in public records yielded nothing. It was a ghost, a project that officially never existed. I was hitting a wall, and the clock was ticking. Then I remembered another one of my father's lessons. The most valuable information is never written down, Finn. It's spoken. You just have to find the right person to listen to. He had a network, a small, trusted circle of old-school maritime historians and retired sailors. One name stood out in his old address book, Captain Eva Rostova. The notes next to her name were brief but intriguing. Knows the Reaper's teeth. Owes me a debt. Trust her. Finding her wasn't easy. She wasn't online. She lived off the grid. But my father had taught me how to navigate more than just oceans. I found her through an old, encrypted maritime forum, using one of my father's old aliases. I sent a single cryptic message. The Cartographer's son seeks to understand the ghosts in the water. Project Maelstrom. The reply came 3 hours later. It was just an address. A small waterfront tavern in a gritty port town 3 hours down the coast. I packed the secret map and a few of my father's other charts into a waterproof satchel. Before leaving, I did something my father would have appreciated. I took down all his maps from the attic walls and replaced them with cheap, generic nautical prints I bought from a tourist shop. Then I went to the sea chest and swapped the real sonar chart with a beautifully drawn but ultimately meaningless fantasy map my father had made for me as a child. The bait was set. The tavern was exactly as I'd pictured it, dark, smelling of stale beer and brine, filled with the low murmur of sailors' tales. I sat in a corner booth, waiting. A few minutes later, a woman approached. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent blue eyes that had clearly seen more than a few storms. Her face was a roadmap of a life lived at sea. "You have your father's eyes," she said, her voice a low, gravely rasp. She slid into the booth opposite me. "I am Eva Rostova. You mentioned a ghost project. That's a dangerous name to be throwing around." "My father is dead," I said, getting straight to the point. "My stepfather is trying to seize his work. I think he's after this." I slid the real map across the table. Eva unrolled it. Her professional calm shattered. Her eyes widened and a flicker of something, fear or maybe recognition, crossed her face. She looked up at me, her gaze intense. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "He left it for me. He said I had to find the ghosts in the water. Eva, what is Project Maelstrom?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. "It wasn't a project, Finn. It was a cleanup operation. In the late 90s, a fleet of experimental stealth submarines, ours, American, were being tested off that coast. They had a new, unstable prototype reactor. Something went wrong, a catastrophic failure. One reactor went critical, and it caused a chain reaction. The entire fleet was lost, sunk. The Navy couldn't risk the truth getting out. A fleet of next-generation subs, lost to a design flaw, it would have been a global scandal, a strategic nightmare." My blood ran cold. "So they buried it." "Deeper than that," she said, her finger tracing the sonar signatures on the map. "They declared the area a weapons range to keep people out, erased the records, the sailors, the engineers. They were all declared lost at sea in a training accident. Your father was one of the civilian cartographers on the survey team. He was the one who mapped the initial wreckages before the official cover-up began. He knew the truth, and he refused to let it be buried. Suddenly it all made sense. My father's illness, the rare neurological decay. It wasn't a disease. They poisoned him, didn't they? I asked, the words catching in my throat. To silence him. Eva nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a grim sadness. We were never sure, but he knew they were coming for him. That's why he created this map. It's not just a map of wrecks, Finn. It's a map of the truth. It proves the cover-up. My phone rang. It was Marcus. His voice was laced with triumphant fury. Time's up, Finn. I have a team of movers and an appraiser on their way to the house now. I hope you've come to your senses. We're clearing out the attic, starting with that ridiculous sea chest. I looked at Eva, then at the map. The map that held the key to my father's honor and the secret to his murder. Let them. I said into the phone, my voice steady and cold. Let them take the chest. Let them take the maps. Let them think they've won. I hung up. Eva looked at me, a question in her sharp eyes. They're not after the map, I said, a slow, cold realization dawning on me. They're after the man who can read it. My father had been silenced. Now they were coming for the cartographer's son. The line went dead, but the message was chillingly clear. Marcus wasn't just clearing out an attic. He was erasing evidence and hunting the loose end. Me. Leaving the tavern, I felt a profound shift inside me. The grief I had carried for my father was crystallizing into something harder, sharper, purpose. They won't stop with the house, Eva said, her voice grim as we stood on the windswept pier. If Marcus Thorne is involved, this goes beyond a simple corporate buyout. He has connections your father and I could only dream of and fear. He's not just cleaning house, he's sanitizing a crime scene. He thinks the secret is in the chest, I said, my mind already working, charting a new course. He'll get the fantasy map and think he has the prize. It'll buy me some time. Time for what? Eva asked, her sharp eyes studying me. To run? To hide? Finn, these people silenced your father. They won't hesitate to do the same to you. My father didn't run, I replied, the words feeling truer than anything I had said in years. He charted a course. He left me a map to the truth, and I'm going to follow it to the end. A rare, approving smile touched Eva's lips. Good, your father entrusted me with something for you, should this day ever come. She reached into her worn satchel and pulled out a small, waterproof case. Inside was a device that looked like a rugged, older model satellite phone. This is a secure comms unit, military grade, untraceable. The only pre-programmed number is mine. Samuel said you'd know what to do with it. She also handed me a set of keys. These are for my boat, the Wanderer. She's old, but she's fast, and her sonar is specially modified. If you need to see the ghosts for yourself, she'll take you there. The offer was a lifeline. I now had a guide, a vessel, and a secure way to communicate. We parted ways, two ghosts from different generations united by a single purpose. I drove through the night, not back to the city, but further up the coast, to a small, secluded marina where the Wanderer was docked. The whole way, I felt eyes on me. A black sedan, the same model I'd seen lurking near my father's house in the weeks after his death, was tailing me. They weren't being subtle. They wanted me to know they were there. They were hurting me. I didn't lead them to the marina. Instead, I pulled into a crowded 24-hour diner, a classic misdirection tactic Alistair had taught me from an old spy novel. I left my car in the brightly lit parking lot, walked in the front door, and slipped out the back. An hour later, after a series of bus transfers and a long walk in the dark, I was standing on the deck of the Wanderer. My phone buzzed. It was an alert from the discreet security cameras I had set up in the attic years ago. I watched the live feed. Marcus was there, overseeing two movers as they carelessly hauled away my father's life's work. They opened the sea chest with a crowbar, the sound a physical blow. I saw Marcus snatch the fantasy map, a triumphant, greedy smirk on his face. He'd found his fool's gold. The bait was taken. Now for the trap. I spent the next day and night on the boat, poring over my father's real map and Eva's modified sonar equipment. The sonar wasn't just powerful. It was designed to detect specific metal alloys, the kind used in experimental military submarines. I called Eva. They have the fake map, I said. They'll be trying to decipher it. It'll lead them to a set of false coordinates in the middle of a deep-sea trench. It should keep them busy for a while. Good, she replied. But what's your move? You can't hide on that boat forever. I'm not hiding, I said, my eyes fixed on a specific cluster of sonar signatures on the chart. One of the wrecks was separate from the others, located in a particularly treacherous canyon on the seafloor. It was marked with a single tiny star, my father's symbol for something important. I'm going hunting. My father's final note said they sank the truth. I think he meant it literally. I think he hid the proof inside the flagship. The plan was insane. Taking a small boat into a restricted naval zone, diving on a classified wreck, it was a suicide mission. But it was the only move I had left. Before I set out, another text came from the unknown number, from Eleanor. Thorne is moving. He's not deciphering the map. He's selling it. A meeting is scheduled in 48 hours on his private yacht, the Leviathan, anchored just outside the Reaper's teeth. The buyers are on their way. My blood turned to ice. He wasn't even going to check if the map was real. He was selling the promise of the secret to his foreign buyers, planning to take their money and disappear long before they realized they'd been duped. But it also meant they would all be there, in one place. Marcus, his buyers, and the truth all gathered at the edge of my father's watery grave. The storm was coming, and I was going to sail right into the eye of it. The new intelligence from Eleanor changed everything. My mission was no longer a quiet expedition to find the truth. It was a high-stakes interception. Marcus Thorne, on his gleaming yacht, the Leviathan, was about to commit treason, and I was the only one who could stop him. I had less than 48 hours. I steered the Wanderer out of the marina under the cloak of a moonless night, the boat's specially muffled engine barely a whisper over the waves. The sea was calm, a deceptive stillness before the storm I knew was coming. Using my father's charts, I navigated through a series of treacherous, little-known channels to bypass the main naval patrols guarding the restricted zone. I was a ghost in the water, just as he had been. Hours later, the Reaper's teeth appeared on the horizon, a jagged silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. And there, anchored just beyond the edge of the restricted zone, was the Leviathan. It was an obscene display of wealth and power, a floating glass palace lit up like a small city, mocking the dark, turbulent waters it floated upon. According to Eleanor's intel, the exchange was set to happen at sunrise. I had a narrow window. I cut the engines and let the boat drift, using the deep, rocky inlets for cover. It was time to go hunting for my father's flagship. I fired up Eva's modified sonar. The screen flickered to life, painting the seafloor below in eerie shades of green and blue. The submarine graveyard was there, just as the map had shown. A silent field of fallen titans. My focus was on the single wreck marked with a star. It lay deeper than the others, nestled precariously in a deep-sea canyon. Maneuvering the boat into position was a nerve-wracking process, a delicate dance with currents that could dash the Wanderer against the unseen rocks below. With the boat secured, I prepared the ROV, a small, remote-operated submersible equipped with a high-res camera and a manipulator arm. It was old, but I had spent the night modifying it, reinforcing its chassis and boosting its signal strength. As I lowered the ROV into the black water, my heart pounded. The descent was agonizingly slow. The pressure gauge climbed steadily. On the screen, the dark water gave way to the ghostly shape of the submarine. It was the USS Tempest, the fleet's command vessel. It was eerily intact, resting on the canyon floor like a sleeping leviathan. I guided the ROV along its hull, my eyes scanning for any sign of a breach, an external access point my father might have used. Then I saw it, a small maintenance hatch near the conning tower, one that wasn't on the official schematics. It was held shut not by a standard lock, but by a sequence of small, recessed pressure levers, a watchmaker's lock, designed to be opened only by someone who knew the precise combination and pressure. My father's last lesson. It took me nearly an hour, my hands sweating as I manipulated the ROV's arm, pressing the levers in the sequence Alistair had taught me for disassembling the most complex chronometers. Finally, with a soft hiss of displaced water, the hatch swung open. I maneuvered the ROV inside. The interior was a time capsule of the disaster, everything frozen in the final moments of chaos. But my target was the captain's safe in his private quarters. I found it, its door slightly ajar, as if my father had left it for me. The ROV's arm reached inside and retrieved a single, waterproof metal cylinder. the truth. As the ROV began its slow ascent, the comms unit from Eva crackled to life. "Finn, they're on the move," she said, her voice urgent. "A helicopter is approaching the Leviathan. The buyers are arriving early. You're out of time." I looked at my screen. The ROV was still hundreds of feet below the surface. On the horizon, the sun was beginning to break, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. I had the proof, but it was useless if I couldn't get it to the world before Marcus Thorne sealed his deal and disappeared. Then I saw my chance. A crazy, desperate, one-in-a-million shot. The sonar map didn't just show the wrecks, it showed the entire underwater topology. The deep-sea canyon where the Tempest lay, connected to a series of submerged volcanic vents. Vents that, according to my father's notes, were still active. "Eva," I said into the comms unit, my voice calm, a plan forming in my mind. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to create a ghost." "What are you talking about?" "The naval patrol routes. I'm sending you a set of coordinates. At exactly 600 hours, I need you to bounce a high-frequency sonar ping off the main canyon wall at these specific coordinates. It will create a false reading, a sonar echo. It will look like an unauthorized submarine entering the restricted zone." There was a pause. "Finn, that will bring the entire patrol fleet down on this position. They'll be on you in minutes." "I know," I said, my eyes on the Leviathan. "That's the point. The exchange is happening on the yacht, but the money, the real leverage, won't be on board. It will be in a digital transfer, waiting for confirmation. I'm not going to stop the meeting. I'm going to crash it." I had to get the cylinder, expose the truth, and get out before the Navy arrived. It was a race against my stepfather, against his buyers, and against the full military force of the United States. My father charted the map, but I was about to navigate the storm. The ROV broke the surface with the precious cylinder just as the sun's first rays hit the deck of the Leviathan. In the distance, the helicopter was landing, delivering the final players to Marcus Thorne's endgame. The clock was ticking. I pulled the cylinder aboard, my hands slick with seawater. Inside was a logbook, its pages perfectly preserved. It was the USS Tempest's final log, written by its captain in the moments before the disaster. It detailed the catastrophic reactor failures, the desperate attempts to warn Naval Command, and the final, horrifying order they received: maintain radio silence. They were being buried alive to protect a military secret. But there was more. The last page contained a sworn statement, signed by my father and 2 other surveyors on the recovery team, detailing how the Navy had sabotaged their communication equipment to prevent them from reporting the truth. It was the smoking gun, but the proof was useless if it stayed with me. "Eva, are you in position?" I spoke into the secure comms unit. "Ready, Finn. Are you sure about this?" Her voice was tight with tension. "My father trusted you. Now I am," I replied. "On my signal." I fired up the Wanderer's engines and pushed the throttle to its limit. The boat surged forward, no longer a ghost, but a spear aimed directly at the heart of the Leviathan. I had one chance to get close enough. As I sped across the water, I opened my laptop, the salt spray misting the screen. I initiated a program I'd written during the long night, a data burst protocol that would upload the entire contents of the logbook to a secure server Eleanor had provided. But the upload would only complete with a final authorization key, a key I would transmit at the last possible second. Alarms blared across the Leviathan. They had spotted me. Figures appeared on the deck, pointing, shouting. I could see Marcus's face, contorted with rage and disbelief. He had no idea who I was, only that some madman in a fishing boat was about to ruin his multi-million-dollar deal. A smaller speedboat detached from the yacht, cutting through the waves to intercept me. They were armed. "Eva, now!" I yelled into the comms. Miles away, Eva sent the high-frequency ping. On naval radar screens across the region, a ghost appeared, a massive, unidentified submarine signature, moving at high speed within the restricted zone. The effect was instantaneous. The comms on the Leviathan would be exploding with panicked warnings from the buyer's security detail. The speedboat heading towards me suddenly veered off, racing back to the yacht to evacuate its principals. They weren't soldiers, they were businessmen. They had no interest in getting caught in the middle of a potential naval conflict. The chaos bought me the time I needed. I veered the Wanderer sharply, not heading for the yacht, but for the treacherous rocks of the Reaper's teeth, using them as cover. As I entered the labyrinth of jagged stone, I hit the final command on my laptop. Upload complete. The truth was out, or at least it was on its way. Simultaneously, the roar of jet engines filled the air. 2 Navy F-18s screamed overhead, breaking the sound barrier as they raced towards the ghost on their radar. Below them, patrol boats were converging on the location Eva had targeted. The trap had been sprung. I watched as Marcus Thorne's deal fell apart in spectacular fashion. The buyer's helicopter lifted off in a panic. The yacht was scrambling to pull anchor. But it was too late. The first naval patrol boat was already on the horizon, heading straight for them, drawn by the illegal presence of a civilian vessel so close to a high-alert zone. Marcus Thorne wasn't going to get his money. He was going to get a federal investigation. I turned the Wanderer back towards the open sea and disappeared into the morning mist. The aftermath was exactly as my father would have charted it. The leaked logbook, corroborated by Eleanor's network, created a firestorm. The Project Maelstrom cover-up was exposed. High-ranking officials were disgraced, congressional hearings were launched, and the families of the lost sailors of the USS Tempest finally got the truth they had been denied for decades. Marcus Thorne and his associates were arrested, not for treason, but for a web of financial crimes and conspiracy that the investigation unraveled. My mother, using the evidence I provided, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the government contractors who had silenced my father, winning a settlement that honored his name far more than money ever could. She never remarried. She moved back into the old coastal home, turning the attic not into a storage space, but into the Samuel Finn Maritime Museum, a place where the work of a great cartographer would be preserved forever. I never went back to that life. My name was never publicly mentioned in the investigation. I was a ghost, a whisper. I now work with Eva and Eleanor's quiet organization. We don't have a name. We don't have an office. We are a network of keepers, librarians, historians, engineers, and sailors. We are the guardians of truths that are too dangerous to be known, but too important to be forgotten. Sometimes, late at night, I take the Wanderer out onto the calm, dark ocean. I look up at the stars, the same stars my father used to chart. And I know he wasn't a failure. He wasn't a dreamer. He was a cartographer. And he left me his most important map. A path that showed me not where to go, but who I was meant to be, the keeper of his legacy. The son who finally gave a voice to the ghosts in the water.